Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second session today on Peacebuilding. I'm Julie Hammerman. I'm the Executive Director of JLens. And if you're just joining us, if you missed any of the content from yesterday or earlier today, all the recordings are going to be on our website, jlensnetwork.org. You can also go to the website and find speaker bios and a detailed agenda. So this session will end about 5 minutes before the hour to allow us to transition and also to give everyone a short break. And if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A box below. So let's begin. This session is called Business and Investment to Further Peacebuilding and Coexistence. And it's really one of the most overlooked areas of impact investing. We wanted to have a session on this topic at our summit 2 years ago, and we just couldn't fit it into the agenda. So even though we've condensed this summit and made it virtual, we're not in person in New York, this was a key priority for us. It's a key Jewish value, coexistence and peace, and we really wanted to bring this to the field, to the institutions watching. So Jeff Sachs just spoke of the 17 UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And in particular, we're focused obviously right now with the pandemic around number 3, focused on global health. But there's SDG number 16, which focuses on peace. Or promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. And again, it's the least addressed SDG by the impact investing field. So something that we want to bring to the forefront. This session today is going to explore the use of impact investing and corporate social responsibility, 2 ways of positioning the economic sphere, business and investment capital, to address some of these issues, to heal divides, to alleviate conflict, and to create shared purpose. And conflict regions around the world are sometimes considered high risk, areas that investors should avoid or companies should avoid. But we want to make the case that there is a critical role to be played by impact investors in particular, by innovative companies, and by incredibly courageous entrepreneurs who are laying the economic foundation for peace and conflict resolution, hopefully to ensue. So I'm going to start. I want to welcome a terrific panel today. I'm going to start with Kelly Goodejohn. She is the VP of Coffee Sustainability at Starbucks, and she leads the company's ethical sourcing and sustainability strategies from multiple conflict and post-conflict regions around the world. So Kelly, welcome. Starbucks has enormous buying power, and the company decided to leverage that power and support farmers in a variety of regions, including conflict areas. So how did the company make that decision?
First of all, Julie, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on behalf of what Starbucks is doing around the world and to be among these really incredible panelists that we have, you have us joined here today. As a company, we buy approximately 4% of the world's coffee. We source it from over 400,000 farmers. And we know that our success as a company is directly linked to the success of farmers who grow that coffee and the land on which it's grown. Coffee is grown in incredibly beautiful landscapes in between the tropics at high elevations, but oftentimes these areas are dealing with challenges, whether socially or politically. I've had the chance to see firsthand the challenges that these coffee communities are facing, whether it's lack of political stability, food insecurity, or the effects of climate change. And in fact, there's an estimated 25 million farmers around the world, many of whom are smallholder farmers, so very small plots of land, whose family depends on coffee. And we're proud to be a purchaser of the highest quality coffee from over 30 countries. It's really a deep sense of responsibility to do what we can to support coffee farmers and their communities, really to ensure the future of coffee for all, for everyone in that value chain. In addition to paying premium prices, we also have a network of holistic support system, whether it's agronomy support, technical assistance and training, whether it's low interest loans to coffee farmers, our goal to get out 100 million disease-resistant coffee trees to farmers so they can reinvest in their business, all the while helping to empower women in these communities. But it's our customers who really appreciate that high quality, and they expect that diversity of origin from us. They come to us because of the art of blending and roasting coffee, but it's also the unique flavors that we can offer them. And we know that bringing some of the world's hidden gems to our customers not only is important for them, but it's also important for those communities. And we found it to be very transformative.
Great, thanks, Kelly. It's terrific work. Can you talk specifically about some either even one example just of an area where there is a conflict or most recent conflict, maybe Colombia or Democratic Republic of Congo? You know.
Sure. It's my pleasure to share. We have quite a few examples that I could share, but let me talk about Colombia. Coffee farmers in Colombia really faced challenges maintaining their crops because of the 50-year civil conflict. There was a lack of technical assistance, lack of resources. It really caused a setback for certain pockets within Colombia. And as we all know, Colombia is known for this incredible coffee. And what we also saw were in some of these conflict regions, unfortunately, the livelihood of some individuals were based off of illicit crops like coca leaves. So what Starbucks did, we found this incredible partnership with the U.S. Embassy through the Agency for International Development, or USAID, and we partnered together to help farmers refocus on their crops with an emphasis on coffee quality, and really providing thousands of farmers in post-conflict zones within the country, training in agricultural best practices, climate adaptation work, really giving them the tools in addition to technology like laptops and those types of tools so that they could run their farm as a business. Through this, we were able to leverage our own agronomy team in Colombia to scale and reach more farmers. And a lot of those farmers were really that next generation, that younger cohort of farmers who wanted to see coffee as a good, thriving business to support their family. And we also saw some incredible quality coming to bear. We became a major buyer of that coffee, and in fact, it's opened up to broader market access for those farmers who didn't have it before for other buyers in the international community.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And it's interesting that you mentioned the next generation post-conflict because they are critical to peace building. Yeah. So I'm going to transition now to Zika Abzuk. Zika, good evening. It's morning here, evening there. I know you're in Israel. You're a senior business development manager at Cisco. So Cisco has a long history of business history in Israel. And in the early 2000s, the company made a significant push to invest in the Palestinian economy. Can you share more about what the company did, including Cisco's investment fund and digital hubs?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I just wanted to say that I'm happy to thank you for, I'm happy to join the panel. And, it's the first time in 2 months that I put lipstick on, so I feel like I'm going places. So thank you for that.
Me too.
So Cisco decided in 2009 to make a $10 million investment in the Palestinian territories in enabling new models of job creation. And we tried to figure out how to do that. And in meeting with our Palestinian partners and listening to them, they said, talking to them to understand how to go about doing that, they said, we've been Israel's neighbor for so long, and through these years we saw how you've become the startup nation, and this is for us. We think that the Palestinian people is very similar to the Israeli people, and we think we have quite good qualities, as you do, a high number of students that go to universities, and a spirit of entrepreneurship, and we believe we can become a startup nation as well, and we'd like your help in making that happen. So that sounded like a great challenge for us, and we partnered together with PETA, which is the Palestine IT Association, and the government to actually see how we can enhance certain building blocks in the ecosystem, the Palestinian IT ecosystem. So of course we had to learn it, and we met with many companies and entrepreneurs, and they all said, we have good talent and a number of people that can provide outsourced R&D work to companies across the world. But when we come and offer our services in that, many companies says, well, you know, Palestine is a conflict area, and this is an area that is kind of colored red on our map. So we are sorry, but it's too much of a risk. And they've asked Cisco to be the pioneer, to start outsourcing work to Palestinian companies, and then help them tell the story that Palestine is open for business. And that's what we decided to do. So we started outsourcing work to three companies in Palestine, but also invested in other building blocks in the ecosystem, such as helped start a venture capital fund and invested in an accelerator and training for different service providers. But I think the highlight of our investment was really the outsourcing, because we started outsourcing work to 10 engineers, 3 companies, 10 engineers, and within a year, because we were so happy with the work that we were getting, we extended it to 50 engineers, and then together with our Palestinian partners, actually knocked on other international companies' doors and shared with them our success story and encouraged them to come and invest as well. So in this way, we kind of enriched the Palestinian IT ecosystem and created more than 1,000 jobs, as an example.
It's really terrific work. Thank you for sharing. So I want to turn now to Sheldon Himelfarb. So Sheldon is the president and CEO of PeaceTech Labs, which is a nonprofit that was formerly part of the US government's Institute for Peace. So Sheldon, you've managed peace building programs in numerous conflict areas, and PeaceTech Labs has done some really unique work. In particular, one thing that you're doing that's really of interest to us is the PeaceTech Accelerator. Could you give us some examples of leveraging technology companies to help in areas of conflict, maybe Hala Systems or Junub Games?
Sure, Julie, it's a pleasure. And again, let me add my thanks to you and to the whole JLens team for setting this up. I love talking about this topic. Yes, so we've set up a PeaceTech Accelerator where we've had a total so far of 36 companies from around the world in the accelerator. Every one of them is working on either a business concept or a technology concept that can help in peace building, broadly defined. So in order to sort of make that come alive, let me talk about those examples that you mentioned, Hala Systems and Junub Games. But I also want to pick up on what Kelly was saying, because Kelly was talking about connecting, you know, small farmers with Starbucks. We've actually had 3 companies coming through the accelerator, one from Ghana, one from Kenya, and one from the US, all of whom were working on connecting small farmers to large buyers. Really interesting. One was digitizing the whole value chain, trying to make contracts work for small farmers. Another was coming at it from the financing end. And a third company was working at it from a logistics perspective. So in Colombia, avocados are often left to rot on the ground because the farmer can't get them to market, doesn't have access to the truck. So we had a small entrepreneur who was figuring out kind of an Uber for trucking to try to do peer-to-peer sharing. So those are just good examples from around the world where we're seeing clever entrepreneurs tackling similar problems, right? Getting small farmers to connect to the large buyers. The 2 companies that you mentioned, Hala Systems and Junub Games, now they are really our best examples of companies working in the midst of a war situation, of a conflict situation. So what Hala Systems did, it designed sensing technology that tracks missiles when they're fired, sends a warning out to civilians to get out of the way. You have about 7 to 10 minutes before a missile will land. And they have just actually attracted a round of financing from Mark Cuban, who put $1 million into them. Not just because they are doing something that's saving lives, but the same platform that they created can be used for anti-poaching activities and other ancillary activities around the world that are profitable. So a great example of a PeaceTech company that really found a way to save lives, but also to deploy the technology in a way that makes money. Juno Games is a South Sudanese small gaming enterprise where the founder of that company was hoping to use the gaming as a means of educating young people. And I don't know whether that company is going to survive. I really don't know, because it's such a difficult war environment there that he's working in. But you can see that's kind of the range of PeaceTech entrepreneurship that we're seeing out there, from logistics companies to sensing technology to energy companies, health companies, and gaming companies.
Excellent. Thank you, Sheldon, for sharing that. I'm going to turn to our last panelist, Doug Krikler. Doug, you're the CEO of the Portland Trust, which is a British nonprofit action tank, not a think tank, but an action tank whose mission is to promote peace and stability between Israelis and Palestinians through economic development. Can you tell us about the mission of the Portland Trust, and in particular, why is economic development so critical for peace building?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And to echo the comments of all the previous panelists, it's a pleasure to be with you and to take part in this conversation. I was also particularly interested to hear Zika talk about Cisco's experience on the ground in the West Bank, very much part of the work that we've been doing, and in fact, in many respects, partnering with them at the time in building out the Palestinian tech ecosystem. But I guess to answer your question, you know, when the Portland Trust was established, coming up for not far short of 20 years ago now, the founders of the organization, Sir Ronald Cohen, Sir Harry Solomon, and a small group of people took the view that there were 3 strands to the DNA of any future peace settlement between the Israelis and Palestinians, what they called a triple helix, namely security, politics, and the economy. And their view at the time was that other people worrying about politics, other people worrying about security, but no one else was really focused on the economy as a fundamental requirement for this sustainable platform. So they established the Portland Trust really with the mission of driving economic development as part of this triple helix of building a sustainable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, the Portland Trust is not a political organization, but we do have one, if you like, overarching political position, which is that lasting and sustainable peace will only be achieved through a negotiated political settlement in the context really of a 2-state solution. And I think it's important to say, particularly now when others are promoting, you know, the economy and prosperity in the context of peace processes, that economic development is not an alternative to a political resolution. But we do believe that it's essential in contributing to an environment that makes a political outcome more rather than less likely. And you know, that in a sense is what drives our work. And in the meantime, whilst we're working towards that political solution, economic development provides an alternative to some of the perhaps more radical or extreme solutions that others are offering. It gives people a sense of tangible hope, opportunity, and in the context of you know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, perhaps the development of a thriving Palestinian private sector along the lines of what Zika was talking about, in a sense redresses the structural imbalance to an extent between Israel and the Palestinians, and creates a community with a shared language, a shared understanding, and a shared vision of what a sustainable solution can look like.
Great, thank you, Doug. So I want to turn back to Kelly. So Kelly, you described how difficult the process is for a business, how it's risky to try to bring business and economic development to conflict areas. Can you tell us some of the challenges? We don't want to sugarcoat this.
No, not at all. And each situation is unique. Each initiative has its own level of complexities and requirements and needs. But there are some common themes that we've found through our experience. First, I think the first challenge is making sure you have the right approach, that you're outlining a program that ultimately can be self-sustaining. This is not about coming in and doing charity work. It's about finding a business model that can thrive and can be built and owned by the community. And so we found this economic stability aspect to be really crucial. In fact, in the case of Colombia, it wasn't good enough for farmers to transition from, coca to coffee, or to all of a sudden, have access to training and education. It was very important that this work and the role of coffee provided good livelihood for them and their families. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work. And we also had to ensure that they had access to markets. Infrastructure is another issue. We were doing some work in the Democratic Republic of Congo with a group of farmers, and this was a thriving hub of coffee. But after years of war, it just destroyed the coffee industry, destroyed the infrastructure. And so really coming in and needing to rebuild that. And it's not just equipment, but it's also the knowledge, the maintaining land, getting plants put in the ground that won't produce coffee for 3 years. So there's some real struggles there, and you have to be patient in coffee. And like most things, it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a 2-month cycle. And I would say another challenge, this is an opportunity as well, is when you're looking for those right partners to work with. Certainly we want to have the highest impact. We want to work with partners who share that vision and objectives. And it's really important to set the stage in the beginning before you begin, so that you have that sense of shared outcome and shared responsibility. Because ultimately it's not about any one of our organizations, it's about the impact that's happening on the ground.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Zika, so you're operating, or Cisco was operating in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is, to put it mildly, complex, very complex. And so I'm wondering, what were some of the challenges that you faced in the work that Cisco did?
Well, first of all, as we continued working together, there were a few wars in Gaza, for instance, so that was a challenge, and there was hesitation both on our side, on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side, about how to deal with it while you continue working together. Because working together was something that actually enabled to build trust within the teams. It enabled the people to kind of concentrate on the work and deliver on time, and that was what both sides concentrated on, and through the war. And only after after the war, people could start discussing the situation and opening up to it and widening the conversation. But apart from, so that was one challenge. Another challenge was the cultural differences and the learning to work together and developing a common language. And I think one of the things that made it successful for us was the fact that we did not play the political game that is being played, that is a zero-sum game, that whatever my side wins means that your side loses. But we actually played a different game, a kind of a win-win situation where we both benefit from working together and actually achieve much more by working together.
Terrific, thank you, Zika. So Sheldon, you've shared that traditionally that 98% of the funding for peace building comes from governments, and 2% comes from everyone else, foundations, corporations, others. And I know one of the goals of your organization is to shift that balance, to create more of a role for private capital and for business. So I want to ask you though, is peace building investable, or should it be something that we leave to governments and philanthropy and the like?
Absolutely not leave it to governments and the like, or we will never, ever be doing conflict prevention, because governments really can only respond, barely respond to the challenges directly ahead of them. And by the way, those numbers are very rough approximations, 98%. But in my career, and I've been working in conflict zones since the Mesozoic era, I have seen, the vast majority of the funds is coming from governments to work there, and is supplemented by other sources. But there has never been, and you hear this in what Kelly was saying, and what Zika was saying, and what Doug was saying, there has never been a better time for the private sector and the peace building community to be working together because of shared interests. You've heard, mention of shared action, shared responsibility, shared vision already by everybody on this panel. And it's because we all understand the world's changed. You can't expect companies to invest in these very complex environments as charity, and nor do you need to, because the benefits are there. As I said, when I used to go to, when I started doing this work, I would go to a company and ask them to sort of partner with us in Liberia to help that country recover, or in Burundi. And they would look at me and say, oh, I had so many other places where I can make money. I'm just not interested. Come back at another time. Well, today the conversation is completely different, because of all the things you've been hearing here already. Either Starbucks has its supply chain where it's getting coffee from a country like Colombia, or Zika's talking about identifying talent. There's talent that's coming out of these conflict countries. And we all know that the world's gotten smaller, that people in conflict zones today are also feeding their cell phones. And so, which means the next set of customers is only a connection away, a push of a button away. So just for those very reasons, talent, supply chain, customers, there's so much incentive for the private sector and the peace building community to come together and grow the peace building pie, if you were, to create more stability and security for everyone, and better business. It's just good business. And that is really, really different from where I started this conversation with businesses 25 years ago.
Yeah, I'll agree. I remember when I started at JP Morgan, and they had their philanthropy department where a friend of mine worked, and it was grant making, and it was completely separate. Yeah. So, and now it's so different. So actually, I want to ask Zika that question. What do you say in response to what Sheldon is saying? How do you think about a balance now between a company embedding good kind of ethical business practices and kind of positive impact even, balanced with just business development, continuing to drive profit forward? Oh, and I want to add one more thing, because I wanted to just note that your CEO at the time, John Chambers, former CEO of Cisco, won an award from the State Department at the time for his work, or for Cisco's work on economic development between Israelis and Palestinians. And one of his quotes was, in accepting that award, that giving back is not only the right thing to do, it's also good for Cisco's business, and that he hopes that Cisco's efforts will create jobs, increase wealth, and contribute to stability in that region. So just wanted you to touch on that.
I wanted to take what we about business development. I actually learned a lot from the work we've done in Palestine, and we understood the need to be connected, to be part of the business world, part of the ecosystem, and this is what we decided as Cisco to invest in digitization, in accelerating digitization. That was before the corona. Before the corona itself kind of accelerated digitization for us. But what we've realized was that what we've done in Palestine is something that people across the world in underserved communities have talent. Talent exists everywhere around the world. And what we've done in Palestine, the way that we connected them and enabled them to be part of the ecosystem is actually something that we can provide access to everyone. And that helped us develop a platform, a digital platform that will enable communities anywhere in the world to actually participate and take a part in the global market and in the ecosystems of high-tech industry or the startup nation, and learn and find their way through this ecosystem.
So Zika, I want to ask you though, Cisco is a public company, right? Is very concerned about quarterly earnings and their shareholders, and they made a significant investment here. Do you know how was that decision processed internally? I'm going to ask Kelly the same question next, but how are these decisions being made by corporate leaders to do things that are potentially somewhat risky, significant positive impact potential, but there's a balance?
Yes, so there is, I think it's an ongoing conversation between the different, the Cisco employees in the different countries and the leadership, and we can come up with good innovative initiatives that support the business, enable the business, but also do good. And if that is something that makes sense business-wise, then it gets, you'll be able to invest in it and make it happen.
I think that's great to hear that it's employee driven. I bet that helps with retention too, being able to come up with those ideas.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to ask Kelly the same question though, before we move on. How do you balance, or how does Starbucks balance between the good that a company can do and responsibility to shareholders? And I guess I mentioned sort of, it used to be that it was the philanthropy department, and then it became the corporate social responsibility department. And now it's really that those goals are being embedded into the different business units. I'm wondering if you see that transition and kind of how far do you think we can drive this positive impact? Is there ultimately a wall that sort of maybe puts a stopping point, or is this going to continue?
Yeah, great question. And I think Sheldon really hit the nail on the head when he described that interconnectedness of doing good and good for business. And in our case, it's really a straight line. If we don't have future supply of high quality coffee, we're not able to meet our growth trajectories. And so we have deliberately put farmers at the center. We've put sustainability at the center of all that we do to ensure that these communities are prosperous, that their coffee's grown in a sustainable way. The last thing we want to see is, our coffee farmers getting out of the business, moving to the city, or transitioning their land to maybe less sustainable practices. Coffee is a good source of carbon capture for the planet, so it has a positive impact. Likewise, as I mentioned earlier, we know that our customers care about this. They expect and recognize our level of expertise when it comes to sourcing and blending and roasting these high quality coffees. And when we mirror that up and look long term at our business strategy, we need to invest in coffee and ensure that we have that long term supply. It's good for coffee communities. It's good for our business.
Terrific, thank you. So I want to turn to Doug. So Doug, the Portland Trust published a report, I think in 2014, that was probably the first thing I think we read at JLens on investing in peace building, and it was incredibly compelling. I wanted to know if you could just share a little bit about that report, maybe highlight a couple of the areas, maybe Northern Ireland or I think it was Cyprus, and some of the lessons learned from that report. And I also just wanted to add for anyone watching, I think Portland Trust is putting out pretty incredible research. I think I get a monthly update on the Palestinian economy, for example. I just really shout out to your research. But that report in particular, really, I thought was pretty insightful.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for the plug. The report actually is on our website as well, so people can feel free to have a look at it. I think it was 2013-14, the role of business in peacemaking, lessons from Cyprus, Northern Ireland, Caucasus. You described us as an action tank previously. I think that's absolutely right. We're we like to do the thinking of a think tank, but always with a view to practical outcomes, but where they are rooted in sort of intellectual rigor and are evidence-based, and hence the need for these sort of research activities that make the case for the role of business in peacemaking and exactly in the kind of things. Obviously, each of those four conflicts was very different, unique, and the report didn't try to draw parallels between them, but rather to try to identify core overarching themes that were, in a sense, universally relevant to the role of business in peacemaking. And I'll just highlight perhaps a few of those quickly, and we can draw on those as we think about the role of business in peacemaking. The first is that business in a conflict situation is often seen as apolitical and impartial, and often the only apolitical, impartial actor in an arena of conflict, providing that the business engages with all sides of that conflict. And that was certainly the case in a number of the geographies that we looked at. Secondly, working in one block through associations or federations increases the influence of business and also protects the individuals who are involved in it, often at some personal risk to themselves. So that power of the collective voice of business is very key. And we saw that very much in our research on South Africa, the consultative business movement, CBM, which got together and made the case to government in South Africa, or the group of 7 in Northern Ireland that did the same. And our experience in the Palestinian context is the establishment of what we call the Coordinating Committee, the CORCO, which brought together and still exists a number of significant leaders of key businesses in Palestine that are able to act as a collective voice in making the case for the role of the economy and economic development in contributing to peaceful outcomes. The third one that I'll highlight is the notion that this has to be a sustained engagement, sustained involvement of business leaders. It's not something you can turn on and off like a tap. There has to be a commitment. We've heard about it from Kelly, from Zika, Sheldon. This is something that has to become part of the DNA of the business engagement.
Great, thank you, Doug. You'll notice also we turned off your camera. We'll turn it back on. Your connection was weak, so we just, by strengthening it, we turn off your camera. So don't take it personally. So I want to now transition to a question for Kelly and Zika. So a major focus for JLens is coexistence. Certainly coexistence in conflict areas, frankly, coexistence in all areas. We're talking kind of about, we're a US-based organization. We have 3 of the 4 of the panelists today are US-based, but there is coexistence and peace building to be done in every country all over the world. And it's a really key focus area for JLens. So I want to ask, what advice do you have for companies that are considering, maybe watching this, or considering using their power to promote coexistence, and any advice you have for investors such as JLens and others that do sort of the shareholder advocacy work in partnership with companies to encourage more coexistence in conflict areas and as a metric generally? Maybe Zika, you could start, and then Kelly.
What advice? I think the advice I would give is to first of all, to get to know the area you're investing in. I wouldn't invest in coexistence in something, you know, in a field that I'm not comfortable in. So I would make the investment in what I understand, in parts of the world that I understand. I would also, you know, from what I can see, the investment could be, if it should be economic in essence, because eventually it has to be impactful and sustainable, and this is the way that the way to make it sustainable and to make it endurable and impactful, I think, is by doing it as a business and creating good partnerships.
Great.
As well.
And Kelly, any insights there, either for folks inside a company or investors on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I loved what Zika said. I think that's exactly right, and that's leaning in on how I would respond. I would also say, you know, there's a lot of times we have the voice to tell stories and to engage audiences in new ways, and perhaps introduce them to areas of opportunity that they may not have realized. This question actually reminds me of a co-op, a coffee farmer co-op in Rwanda that we work with. It was formed from women on opposing sides of the genocide conflict who are coming together and working side by side to grow and process coffee together. These women, you know, were, quote, enemies, but now they're forming friendships, they're reliant upon one another. And, you know, for us, well, yes, we buy the coffee, we market the coffee, and we will support that cooperative. I think the power is actually to tell their story and to introduce the idea of overcoming some of the, you know, hardest things to overcome in life, that it's possible, and to also provide that hope. So I guess the advice would be, you know, don't be afraid to tell those beautiful stories, to dig in and understand the communities, and reach people in different ways.
Great, thank you. So I want to ask a question to Sheldon. Sheldon, what advice do you have for investors, for entrepreneurs who seek to further peace building and coexistence, especially on the private capital side? And I was also hoping that you could touch on the reality that all of us know, that really lasting peace is in the political realm. So I guess just sort of how entrepreneurs and investors navigate that, companies as well.
Well, thanks, Julie. I think you've heard a lot about how complex this is, about the challenges of doing this. But I think Kelly was just starting to get us there a moment ago. My advice is not to underestimate the power, the benefit of doing this kind of work, the psychic benefit, the helping people is what I've learned, having been working with many Fortune 500 companies in conflict zones, from the investment side and from the entrepreneurship side. It's hard to overstate how rewarding this has been for their employees. And I think we kind of, you know, we've talked a lot about the importance of making sure it's shared values, win-win from a business perspective. But it is, I see it time and time again, the work that we have done with these companies, you hear from their employees, this is some of the most satisfying work that they have ever done. And don't underestimate the business value of that kind of motivation that you can provide, that kind of inspiration that you can provide for your own folks. Literally, from AmLaw 100 law firms that have done pro bono work for us on peace building, to the SAP, Amazon Web Services, Facebooks that have sent people out to help us in our trainings, they're deriving huge benefit from their own employees' sort of satisfaction. And I don't think I would advise people to look really closely at how rewarding this can be.
Great, thank you, Sheldon. So Doug, I would try again. So anything to build on that question? I actually, when in your introduction, you mentioned that Portland Trust has been around for 20 years. I didn't realize the organization has been doing this work for 20 years. And, you know, Kelly, I think it was Kelly, touched on patience. I guess I'm just, you know, I'm curious, is the organization seeing progress? You know, it's been, on our prep call, we talked a little bit about Rawabi as an example. It's been a few years since I've been there. Like, what's on the ground, and is this just something that patience is just at the pinnacle for any initiative?
Yeah, look, you need to be resilient. Patience, absolutely. And as I said just before, it's not something that can be turned on and off. This is a commitment that you make for the long term. You know, we have had successes on the way. You mentioned Rawabi. Our role in helping to generate microfinance loans for small businesses, etc., that really helped to kickstart the growth of small and medium private sector-led economic activity. So, you know, there are some significant successes along the way. But, you know, you just have to keep going. I think, you know, one of our key focuses at the moment is building on some of the work that Zika talked about, that we were involved in, you know, 10 years or so ago, almost, you know, around the tech sector. And it's now about, you know, leveraging that and saying the Palestinian tech sector is now sufficiently mature really to start to present a compelling commercial proposition to Israeli companies, multinational companies in Israel and globally, to provide outsourcing that can compete now with India, with Ukraine, with some of the more traditional outsourcing hubs in the world. And we're working very much now to support local Palestinian IT outsourcing companies to build their capacity, to develop their training, to grow their talent, to market and position themselves with a global shop window. And we're seeing success. So, you know, Zika and Cisco were some of the pioneers in that space, but we've continued to grow and build on it. Some of the same actors are still in the field, but, you know, encouragingly now we're seeing some new players emerging, and it's all about how do you create the environment that enables them to flourish, and then the return on that is the impact that has on the broader political atmosphere and on the sense that there is an environment where hopefully peace can flourish. I mean, that's the big idea.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask about USAID. I think in pretty much all the cases that you have offered, all of you, they've played a role to some extent. I don't know if any of you could touch on that, because I know we're making a difference, we're differentiating between business, corporations, entrepreneurs, private capital, and government. But there is some sort of synergy there as well. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one. Elaborate. Zika, yes.
Thank you. I think, you know, USAID was a wonderful partner. When we wanted to share our story with other companies and encourage them to outsource work to Palestinian companies, USAID came with us because there was always a need to get started for an initial small investment to help the companies kind of put the foot in the water. And so in this way, USAID provided the initial investment to help the companies start with the outsourcing and start working with the Palestinian companies. And that was very successful and helpful to companies like Google, Microsoft, University of the People, and others that enjoyed USAID's help. And actually, that was the enabler for other companies to come and join what we started.
I think, you know, I would add, and this was also one of the findings in the report that we mentioned just a moment ago, that there is a role for business working in partnership with other players. So, you know, whether it's NGOs, whether it's global donor agencies such as USAID, whether it's the World Bank or other national donor agencies, etc. It's about creating coalitions of change, and where sometimes it's the donor agencies that can take can lower the risk for private sector investors, right? Can put some of that risk capital up ahead of and take the first loss, which encourages people to come in behind them. So I think that there is a danger that we kind of become very compartmentalized, and we see things as either business or government or the NGOs or grassroots movements. And actually, I think part of our experience on the ground, and where we've tried to act as a catalyst to create opportunities for change, is that it's about playing to the respective strengths of the different players, enabling them to do what they do well, and acting in concert to create the kind of outcomes that we want to see. So definitely there's a role for the NGO community, for government and for the aid agencies. But as Sheldon said earlier, leaving it just to them is likely to keep us in the game for longer than we'd like to be. Business can often shortcut, can accelerate things, and I think that's where business can really come in and drive change as well.
Right. And Sheldon, Kelly, anything to add on that, or any closing words before we conclude the session?
I would just say, I think Doug said it really, really well there, that there are respective strengths that each brings to the table. And I think one thing that I've learned is the critical importance of the cross-sector approach. So as I've said many times, when the technologists are only talking to the technologists, and the conflict experts are only talking to the conflict experts, and the money folks are only talking to the money folks, you will never move the needle on something as complex as the human dynamics of peace building. So it really is, it's not optional, it's mission critical that we get this kind of cross-sector work going. And I will just say, we've been just crazy slow. I mean, it's ridiculous how siloed we remain in all of these conversations. We don't invest nearly enough in driving that forward. That it's not optional, it's essential.
Great, thank you, Sheldon. Kelly, I'm gonna give you final word before I wrap.
Just to build on what Sheldon said, I think, again, finding partners, working with others, there's too much work in this world to be done, and we need to come together and do it in the smartest way, leverage strengths of each other. And this is where, USAID, I think, plays a role in that they enable scale to happen. They can take in smaller investments and make them that much bigger to have a bigger impact and longer sustainment.
Well, thank you all so much. We are out of time, but I wanted to, I just really wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing. And, it's very easy to either bash Wall Street or bash large companies or kind of sort of have this kind of sledgehammer approach. And I think for JLens, and I know for the impact investing community and for all of the folks in the CSR space and for kind of younger generation employees coming up, there's actually an incredible power that comes from investment capital, an incredible power with tools of business and economics. And so using them for good in a range of areas, especially in peace building, is quite inspiring and possible, as we hope we even touched upon today. So love to continue this conversation. So we're going to close this session now. We are going to have a 5-minute break and then start up again with our next session.